If you're like most folks Dr. Kris works with, you're active, you want to take ownership of your health, and you want to age gracefully. The problem is there is so much conflicting information out there about health and wellness, it's tough to know who to trust. Most providers are limited by what insurance will approve, so it can seem like they're only able to help you manage your health decline with more meds. On the Dr. Kris Life Podcast, you'll learn how you can regain your confidence in your health journey. You'll learn helpful knowledge about programs, supplements, peptides, and hormones that Dr. Kris has used with thousands of patients just like you to help them crush their goals and be their best selves. So if you're ready to take charge of your health and are wanting to stay active and healthy so you can be a better parent, partner, or lover, then you're in the right place. Welcome to the Dr. Kris Podcast. Dr. Kris, welcome back to your podcast, the Dr. Kris Life Podcast. How are you?
I'm great today, Steve. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome. So I was jealous. You've been in the Virgin Islands. Is that where you've been?
Yeah, we just did 8 days in the Virgin Islands and got back a couple days ago, trying to reacclimate to the real world again. Mm-hmm. Which actually was funny. When we were coming in on the boat, our captain pointed out, like, there's the real world house, like where they filmed the MTV show Real World. That was like a blast from my college days. It was like, oh, okay, that still exists. Okay. So anyway, just a fun little fact of the Virgin Islands, the real world house is there. Of course, there's probably like 12 different versions of it now.
So, when you're out there relaxing, enjoying life, trying to spend time and disconnect with your family, you had this nagging thing that you wanted to check in on your business while you're gone.
Yeah, I really struggle, and I'm trying to do better with it on completely disconnecting. I think it's a common thread that a lot of us have, is the completely disconnecting. It's a habit. Our cell phones, our emails, our computers, our body, our mind wants to go towards it. And I think it's a special talent who actually can completely disconnect from those things. Psychologically, I mean, it has us. And so, the good news, I guess, for me is I have a wife who constantly says, what are you doing? And so then it makes me realize, like, oh yeah, I guess I am going right back to the laptop or whatever. And so I don't think I did horribly, but I could have done better. That's for sure.
Well, the folks that listen to this, they're providers themselves, and they have a practice, and they're in that practice, and it really pulls at you. And I think one of the stories that I really like, one of your story that really impressed me, is that there's this point in this practice where you kind of wake up and you realize this thing is sucking more of your life out of you than you originally wanted or desired. It's impacting your family life. It's impacting your health. And this brought you to a point where you knew that you had to make a change.
Yeah, sometimes what we kind of say is that you don't really, when you have your own traditional practice, you don't really work for yourself or your customers. You really work for the insurance companies, in my opinion. Ultimately, what you can do for your patients is dictated by those insurance companies. They put enough hurdles and barriers in place that basically you're going to end up doing it their way, by prior authorizations and peer-to-peer reviews, which is where you actually have to set an appointment to talk to their doctor on the phone to get Steve's MRI approved. And there becomes a point in your practice, whether we want to admit it or not, we finally just kind of give up on those things, or at least limit the amount that you do, because you simply can't do them all. I would see patients anywhere from 8 to, our schedule went to 5. We would typically wrap up with the last patient 5:15, 5:20, 5:30, something like that, because we were always running behind, of course. And then you started the paperwork. If you were lucky, you got a little bit of time at lunch to do some of the paperwork, and then you would get done at 5, let's just say 5:15, and for another 45 minutes to an hour, work on paperwork. And, I live about 20, 30 minutes from from the office. Even today, I still practice just a mile away from where I used to practice. Get home at 6:30, 6:45, and you're just exhausted. You're not physically exhausted, just mentally exhausted from everything that you went through that day. And I found as time went on, not only was my physical health suffering, but my mental health was suffering as well. I just would come home crabby and irritated and just didn't really want to talk to anybody, and found myself with young kids and wasn't being quite the dad that I thought I should be. But really what it was is just, could do a little bit of a better job for my patients than I was doing, because the traditional doc, as you've heard me say, with an established patient has somewhere in that 10 to 15 minute range to take care of that patient. And I worked in a very high complexity clinic. It was the county clinic. So what we mean by high complexity is just a lot of medical problems. I didn't see many people that I'm 45 and I have high blood pressure and that's it, and my blood pressure is great and I just need a refill. I mean, we saw those during the day, like, oh, Jesus, we got one good one. All right, good. And knock those out real quick and go to the next one, which we had diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, heart attacks, and took 12 to 15 medications, no exaggeration. And that's just kind of what you saw patient after patient. And so I just came to the reality at some point that I didn't think I could do that for the rest of my life. I really could see myself completely either doing something besides medicine, or I had to make some sort of switch. And obviously I had too much invested in my medical degree to just give up on it at early 40s. That would have been not a very smart decision. So that's when our change started to occur.
Well, how did that make you feel? Were you like discouraged that this journey of becoming a doctor, and I don't know how many years you had invested in that, but here you found yourself later, this wasn't exactly what you had envisioned?
Well, how much doctors have invested is typically at a minimum 11 years, and that's 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, and a minimum of 3 years of residency. So 11 years, and I never took a break. So I came out at, about 28 years old, and you have a lot of debt, and you haven't, all your friends have had real jobs for many years, and they're a little bit, I was actually telling the story the other day. My longtime banker unfortunately passed away about a month ago. And this man, the reason I always followed him is because I came to Weatherford, which is where I'm at. And the first two banks turned me away with a loan. They said I was high risk, and I had accrued all of this credit card debt, because in residency you make practically nothing, but yet you work all these hours, and so like a lot of people, you throw it on credit cards to survive. And I'll never forget them. I just walked into his office, introduced myself, said I was a new doctor. He said, "How much do you need?" I told him, and he said, "Done." And so he was my banker all the way up until he retired about a year ago and unfortunately passed away. But that's my point is, you put all these years into it. You have a lot of debt. It takes many doctors. I was very lucky. I got out of my debt very quickly because I was also in the Air Force Reserves, as well as working at the community clinic, which qualified for loan repayment. So I actually got out of debt in like 3 years, but many providers can take a decade just to get away from their medical school debt and now it's so much more expensive than when I went to medical school. So much more expensive. But yeah, it was very disappointing. Doctors, and I think this has continued. I haven't researched it in the last few years, but when Obamacare kicked in, and you've probably heard me say President Obama said doctors should be happy they're going to get to see more patients, which is a term no physician has ever said unless they're starting their practice. Most of the time we're not looking for more patients. We're looking for a little more reimbursement per patient so that we don't have to see so many patients, because you just can't provide extremely good quality of care when you have to see patients at such a rapid rate. Mistakes happen, It just does. If you have something that you do that normally takes you 30 minutes and you try to do it in 12, there's no way the end product is going to be the same. And it's the same way with providers. And so at that time, physicians were retiring at an incredibly high rate. Doctors that normally maybe would have stuck it out another 8 to 10 years were like, you know what, forget it, I'm out. And so there was a tremendous number of providers leaving the profession. And so, yeah, I was very disappointed. But at the same time, my own health was starting to not do so well. As you've heard me say, I looked at my own lab parameters, and I was pre-diabetic. I was hypertensive, high blood pressure. My cholesterol was through the roof, although I thought I exercised correctly. I ran like 4 days a week, 3 or 4 miles at a time. And I was very much overweight. I was around 35% body fat. I was 200 pounds, 198 pounds, 5'10", 34% body fat. And I was just like, I don't know about you, but like you think in your mind of the stereotypical doctor, and I think Norman Rockwell comes into the picture, and it's that overweight doctor with the big red nose with the glasses on the tip of his nose. And actually, doctors die at an incredibly young age. We have the youngest death age of any profession, And why is that? It's because doctors typically don't take care of themselves. But then I had this epiphany. I was like, hang on a sec. I go into rooms and I try to look my patients in the eyes and I try to tell them, you're not eating right. You're not exercising right. You're not doing this right and that right. Well, hell, I decided I'm surprised no one's ever looked back at me and gone, well, what are you doing? Because it's not working for you either. And that's when I kind of really started to change my mindset of, hang on a second, I cannot possibly be a leader for my patients unless I walk the walk. And it's what we talk about a lot with the SSRP, where I'm faculty, is you must walk the walk to talk the talk. And if you don't, your patients, in my opinion, aren't going to have the same level of respect for you.
So what are as a traditional provider, what are the common options if I'm realizing I'm at a point where I'm at a crossroads, I need to make a change? What are the traditional common options?
It depends on your specialty, of course, but I'm gonna really comment more on primary care type providers because that's what I was or /am. And so there's a few different options. One, doctors can decide to go work for the insurance company. Basically, well, I'm going to go with them. And that's that doctor you talk to on the peer-to-peer review, on the other side of the line. I always wonder, God, what is that life like? But it's, they sit there and take phone calls. You can go into research. That would be a possibility. You could decide to go that aspect. Technology. Most of the time, those aren't the routes that primary care providers are looking for. The med spa became quite popular. And that was actually where I started my exit, was the med spa, and that is kind of says it all, but it's a spa that does cosmetic procedures that are cash based. So that can be quite popular. Now I consider myself an age management medicine physician. So I have a pure cash practice where we really, there is a huge niche these days. It's the fastest growing field of medicine from what I've read. And that is this cash practice, because there's a tremendous amount of Americans that don't have insurance, health insurance, but most likely don't have very good health insurance. And so I fall into that category. I call it catastrophic health insurance. Mm-hmm. It's there if I need I get hit by a bus and I need emergency surgery. I've got it. I'm not going to go bankrupt because of it, but I've got a $10,000 deductible. So I haven't used it in a decade because, it's just there to make sure I don't go broke, to keep my premiums at an absolute minimum. So many times that can be the route, but that transition can be quite tricky for a lot of providers.
So it's not like, this is not for every provider. And I imagine the providers that are listening to this, they're going, this has been on my mind, but to go from a traditional practice to a cash pay practice seems like I need some different skills. It's very scary. It's like starting another business with no guarantees. How did you think through that? What were your ups and downs on that?
Well, and I don't think I necessarily had it completely well thought out. And so that's why I like to do this kind of stuff, because I like to talk about my own failures, perhaps, because I think I could have done it a much more streamlined approach today than I did 12, 13 years ago. We went of the aspect of, let's start this cash practice over here on the side with doing cosmetics. At the same time, got training and worked for Synergenics part-time, which we've talked about, which is where I got my original age management medicine training, and basically worked through their offices and started to kind of slowly build this practice up. But if you're a provider that's out there, and there's so many different ways to do it. The biggest thing that I run into with most providers, and it was completely my scenario, which is no one wants to take a financial step back. That's the scariest thing, especially most providers. I'm not going to say all providers are the primary money earner of the family. Okay. I mean, I guess there could be some scenarios where you've got two providers, and that could be a different scenario. Or maybe you've got just plenty of money in the 401k, and it's not the primary determining factor. But 99% of the time, the providers I'm talking to are the primary money earners, and taking financial step backs, especially in our times today, is always scary. And as I've told you, there's also kind of that machismo thing that we just don't want to take a step back financially, even though, we probably know it'll be fine. So if you have a large practice, many times if providers have truly just this booming practice, they only need 200 to 300 patients to follow them or stick with them to actually have a viable. Of course, viable is what the provider wants to make at the end of the day. I mean, that number is different for every provider. And that's the one thing I always say is, what do you got to make? And then you can kind of work off of those numbers. And that number is vastly different, everyone I talk to. But you're really a cash pay practice. If you're doing just like a straight concierge medical practice, really a full practice is around 300 patients. And so that number is not nearly as big as they think, oh, 300, that's it. And I'm like, yeah, 300 people paying cash. Because the first thing, and this is scary to providers too, is you're probably going to half to 2/3 reduce your staff. I mean, if you've got 10 people on your staff, you'll easily be able to take it down to 4 or 5 people. So your overhead starts to fall tremendously. Smaller spaces, you don't have to have the same footprint to do this type of a model. Every dollar you collect goes right into your bank account versus, you charged $125 to see Steve. It went through Blue Cross Blue Shield. It came back out as $64 because it's a pre-negotiated price. I'm just giving examples. But, many times, though, the most common way that is chosen is to have 2 practices at the same time. And I was talking to a provider just about a week or 2 ago, and she was starting that, and she had started up a med spa, and she was now ready to start trying to ramp up and really start trying the conversion over to cash practice. And so that's probably the least scariest. If a doctor can, maybe work 4 days a week in their traditional practice, 1 day a week in their cash practice. And then as that cash practice gets a little busier, they can maybe hire a nurse practitioner or a PA to take up some of those hours, and then start, working their way over to the cash practice till they have that comfort level that they can jump, over to that cash practice and make enough that they can. Or then I've had one friend that actually completely left his traditional practice and opened his cash practice. And I think he would tell you it's been a struggle, because he started a practice completely from scratch. And that's tough. It can take, I tell docs, you probably need to look at it as 18 to 24 months before you're really starting to make the revenue that you want to make.
But you're seeing the trends. You mentioned that. Talk to us some more about that. There's trends that are affirming that this could be potentially a good business decision.
Yeah, I mean, there's more and more doctors every day. Actually, one of the things I forgot to say is like, if you're gonna thinking about making this transition, I think the most important thing is first to get your education, and that's the part. I was getting my education, but I think it would be important to really go out and get that baseline education either through, there's so many different places to do it, like A4M and SSRP and AMMG, just to name a few, and really figure out what you like. What do you want to do? Find your passion, because that's the one thing I've really learned is you can do way too much. I think most time these practices really, you can hone in on 3, 4, 5, 6 things that you really love to do, that you do well. Don't be afraid to give those patients to other providers on stuff that you don't necessarily embrace or love. But get that education in advance and really figure out what it is you like to do. And another bit of advice I give to all the providers, it's really easy to get yourself into some heavy debt. There's a lot of machines and lasers and these devices now. God, when I started, they were like 60 to 100,000. Now they're 200 to 400,000. And these reps do an amazing job of making you feel like you're going to be rich by buying these machines. I mean, they know everything to do to work us. And we as doctors think we can't be worked, but we absolutely can. And thankfully, I have a cheap spouse who sometimes walks me off the ledge, because I'll be like, yeah, that sounds great. Just be careful. You can find yourself in $1 million worth of debt from these machines really quick. And that's big payments every month, to have to make. And so just really figuring out what you want to do is really important as well. But yeah, so what I was going to say is, when you go to these meetings like A4M now, there's literally thousands of doctors there when you go to these conferences these days. When I first started this, I felt like, I always said I used to feel like I was a lone ranger, and still in my community, I guess I would kind of say I am, but I know that I'm not really. We're just ahead of the trend. But nationally, there's so many providers moving over to this model, and even patients are starting to get very, very used or comfortable with this model as well. I mean, used to, everybody you mentioned this to is like, what? A cash practice? What is that? You don't really get that anymore. I mean, patients really understand it. They understand the value of it. The ones that don't, we educate them. It's not for everybody. There's certainly patients that come in and say, that's crazy. I would never pay out of pocket. I've got insurance. And I'm saying, that's great. That's fine. That's not for you. No problem. No harm, no foul. We can still be friends. So, it's growing at a very rapid rate.
Well, awesome. I think this is a good stopping point in this conversation. I have a lot of questions around financial hurdles and other things, but I think that's something we ought to talk about on the next episode. If I'm a provider and I'm like, I want to talk to someone, are you available to talk? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I am. And I talk to providers every week, and sometimes it's just nothing more than advice, and I don't mind having some, short phone calls, 10, 15 minutes, and just kind of discuss their situation. And we don't charge for that, just to kind of give them an idea or thoughts, or, starting a conversation. And they can do that by, they can either go through our website, theresearchclinic.com, or they can email me directly at drkris@theresearchclinic.com. Be more than happy to start a conversation with them.
All right, Dr. Kris, as always, excellent conversation. Check out the Research Clinic. It's a great example of practice that we've been discussing today. And, it helps you get the vision for what maybe you're wanting to do. There's a lot of resources out there, and be sure to visit drkris.life. That's DR and capital, or, well, just a K. That's not CH, but drkris.life. researchclinic.life. And the research clinic, that's theresearchclinic.com. Dr. Kris, any last words?
No, I think we've covered enough today. I appreciate your time.
All right. We'll see you guys on the next episode. Thanks for joining the Dr. Kris Podcast. If you learned something today and you want to connect and get more information, visit our website, www.drkris.life, where you can find more great information or even schedule a time to learn how you can engage with Dr. Kris. Be sure to follow, like, share, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Dr. Kris Podcast.